The Fugate home looked ordinary from the street. Inside, 3 bodies lay hidden, and a 14-year-old girl was at the center of it. Caril Ann Fugate was born in 1943 in Lincoln, Nebraska. She grew up in a working-class home and went to junior high in Lincoln. Her mother was Velda Bartlett, who was sometimes listed under other names like Velda Fugate or Velda Bartlett Fugate. The household included a stepfather and a young half-sister named Betty Jean. Until early 1958, Caril lived the life of a typical American teenager. She went to school, had friends, and had started a relationship with an older boyfriend, Charles Starkweather. He was about 5 or 6 years older than her. This relationship would later become the central part of a series of tragic incidents that shocked the country. In January of 1958, Charles Starkweather, with Caril by his side, went on a series of tragic incidents across Nebraska and into Wyoming. In total, 11 people lost their lives during this time, including one earlier case linked to Starkweather before the main spree began. The event started on January 21st, 1958. Starkweather went into the Fugate home. He took the lives of Caril's mother Velda, her stepfather Marion, and her 2-year-old sister Betty Jean. After this, Starkweather and Caril stayed in the house for several days. Visitors who came by were turned away, sometimes with notes claiming the family was sick. Soon after, the two left the house. Over several days, they traveled across different towns. Some people they met along the way also lost their lives. Among them were August Meyer, Robert Jensen, Carol King, and members of the Ward family. The spree stretched into Wyoming before it ended on January 29th, after a car chase and a shootout with law enforcement. Communities across the region were deeply shaken, and the story gained nationwide press attention. The question of what role Caril truly played has never been fully settled. Witness accounts, police reports, and testimony gave mixed pictures. In some of her statements, she said Starkweather forced her to cooperate. She claimed he told her that her family was already gone and that he would hurt other relatives if she tried to escape. Prosecutors argued differently. They said she had many chances to run away or call for help, but did not. At times, Starkweather himself claimed that she took part directly. The court eventually ruled that she was involved in the case of Robert Jensen. The jury found her guilty of first-degree responsibility in that case. The events were fast and brutal. Starkweather used guns at times and blunt objects at others. Some victims were targeted randomly, while others were harmed, so the pair could avoid being caught. Because the victims ranged from older adults to young couples, people in small towns felt especially frightened. They could not see a clear pattern in who was being harmed. The main debate became whether Caril was a willing partner or a hostage. The court decided she was an accomplice. Many later researchers and writers disagreed, saying she was only 14 years old and was under extreme pressure from someone much older. At trial, the prosecution focused on her choices. They said she supported Starkweather and had chances to stop him. The defense highlighted her young age and her claims of being under his control. In the end, the jury found her guilty of first-degree charges in Robert Jensen's case. Unlike Starkweather, who was sentenced to lose his life for his actions, Caril received life in prison. She was sent to the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women. Appeals followed, but the verdict stood. During sentencing and in the years after, Caril kept saying she was forced into everything and had no control. She denied enjoying or wanting any part of the act. While in prison, she kept what officials called model conduct. This became important years later when parole boards reviewed her case. In the early 1970s, her sentence was changed, making her eligible for parole. On June 20th, 1976, after about 18 years in prison, she was released. Some people were shocked by this decision, while others believed she had reformed during her time behind bars. After her release, Caril moved away from Nebraska. She eventually settled in Michigan, using her married name Caril Ann Clare. She lived a low-profile life, working ordinary jobs and staying out of the spotlight. Decades later, she applied for a full pardon. In 2020, the Nebraska Board of Pardons denied her request. Relatives of some victims supported that decision, while others believed she deserved to be cleared. Over time, writers, filmmakers, and legal experts have revisited her case. Some call her the 12th victim, saying she was harmed not only by Starkweather but also by the rush to judgment and the limits of the legal system of the 1950s. Others maintain the original view that she was a willing partner. The debate over Caril Ann Fugate continues to this day. Was she a frightened teenager caught in circumstances beyond her control, or was she a partner who chose to stay involved? The story remains one of the most discussed cases of that era. In the next case, a 14-year-old slipped out of a youth facility. By nightfall, someone in her family would never wake again. Christina Joy Fetters was born in 1980. She grew up in Iowa. By early 1994, when she was only 14, she entered a very difficult period in her life. That same year, she was sent to Orchard Place in Des Moines. This was an unlocked facility for young people with behavioral and mental health concerns. While there, she was prescribed Prozac. Life at Orchard Place was not easy for her, but many other girls her age also faced similar struggles. On the morning of October 25, 1994, Christina and another girl from Orchard Place, Jeannie Fox, decided to leave the facility. They hitchhiked to the home of Christina's great-aunt, Arlene Clem. Christina cared deeply for her aunt, which made what followed very shocking. The girls waited until visitors left before they went into the house. Inside, Christina used a frying pan to strike her aunt. She then used a small, sharp tool to cause further harm. Afterwards, they looked through the house, trying to find the keys to a safe or a truck, but they could not. They quickly fled the scene with nothing. That same night, Christina was taken into custody. She admitted to what she had done. Many people wondered if this happened in the heat of the moment or if it had been planned. Christina's defense argued that she was not fully aware of her actions, but experts said otherwise. A psychologist for the prosecution, along with Orchard Place residents including Jeannie Fox, testified that Christina had spoken about her plan ahead of time. The court decided that her actions were deliberate, even though she was only 14. Because of this, Christina's case did not go through the juvenile system. She was tried as an adult in Polk County District Court. The jury took only 1 day to reach a decision. On December 18, 1995, at age 15, Christina became the youngest female in Iowa to receive a life sentence without parole, which at the time was mandatory under state law. She served her sentence at the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women in Mitchellville. Christina appealed her case, but nothing changed for many years. In 2008, her lawyers argued that a life sentence for someone so young was unfair. Then, in 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the case Graham versus F. Florida that long sentences for juveniles had to be reconsidered. 2 years later, in Miller versus Alabama, the court said mandatory life without parole for juveniles was unconstitutional. While her case was under review, Christina received very difficult news. In November 2013, she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer that could not be treated. Because of her illness and the changes in law, a judge resentenced her to life with the possibility of parole, recommending she be released right away. In December 2013, the Iowa Parole Board agreed. She was released into hospice care, becoming the first person in Iowa who had received a life sentence as a juvenile to be freed under such circumstances. This raised a question. Would she have been released if she had not been so ill? The judge himself noted her limited chance to live much longer, and both the judge and the original prosecutor supported her release. Christina entered hospice care in Des Moines in December 2013. Her family stayed by her side and supported her during her final months. On July 27, 2014, Christina passed away at the age of 34. The next 16-year-old was trapped under the control of a man known as Cutthroat. But one night, in a stranger's home, everything changed. Cyntoia Brown was born in 1988 at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Her biological mother struggled with substance issues and gave her up for adoption shortly after her birth. Her defense team later argued that Cyntoia was born with fetal spectrum disorder because of her mother's substance use during pregnancy. She grew up in an adoptive home, but as she got older, she repeatedly entered the juvenile system for offenses against people and property. From April 2001 to September 2003, she was placed in juvenile facilities, including Woodland Hills Youth Development Center in Nashville. During that time, she ran away several times. By August 2004, she was a runaway living on the streets of Nashville. There, she came under the control of a man named Caril Ann Fugate, known as Cutthroat. He forced her into trafficking and controlled her through threats and aggressive behavior. On the night of August 6, 2004, 16-year-old Cyntoia met 43-year-old John Michael Allen, a real estate agent. He offered her $150 and took her to his home. Once inside, she said he showed her weapons. Cyntoia later explained that she thought he was reaching for a gun under the bed. Feeling terrified, she pulled out a handgun from her purse and fired. She has always said she acted out of fear and believed her life was in danger. Prosecutors disagreed. They argued that she planned to rob Allen and that he was asleep when she shot him. Cyntoia was arrested and charged with serious offenses, including first-degree homicide, aggravated robbery, possession of a handgun, and giving a false identity. Although she was only 16, Tennessee tried her as an adult. In 2006, the jury convicted her on all counts. She received a life sentence, with a possibility of parole only after 51 years. That meant she would be 67 before she could even be considered for release. At that time in Tennessee, even minors could face life sentences with decades to serve before parole eligibility. For years, her case remained mostly unnoticed. That changed in 2011, when PBS released a documentary called Me Facing Life, Cyntoia's Story. It shared her background, her history of trauma, and the details of her legal battle. After watching the film, attorney Charles Bone decided to join her defense team. Between 2017 and 2018, social media posts from celebrities like Rihanna, Kim Kardashian West, Cara Delevingne, and Snoop Dogg brought massive attention to her story. Many argued that her punishment was far too harsh for someone who was both a minor and a trafficking victim. Her lawyers continued to appeal. They argued that giving a child a mandatory life sentence without a realistic chance of parole was unconstitutional. Courts in Tennessee and the Sixth Circuit reviewed whether she could ever truly be considered for release, even after 51 years. On January 7, 2019, Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam granted her clemency. He reduced her sentence to time served plus parole. He also recognized her positive efforts while incarcerated and the unfairness of such a long punishment for a teenager. Cyntoia was released on August 7, 2019, after serving 15 years. She was placed on parole for 10 years and required to complete re-entry programs. Since then, she has dedicated her life to helping others. While incarcerated, she earned her GED, an associate degree, and later a bachelor's degree in organizational leadership. She co-founded the JFAM Foundation and the Glitter Project to support at-risk youth and survivors of trafficking. She also works with Epic Girl, an organization that mentors vulnerable girls in Nashville, now known as Cyntoia Brown Long. She lives in Tennessee. She works as an author, speaker, and activist. In her own words, she values freedom every single day. She once said, "When I wake up, my day is mine." As of 2025, she is 37 years old and continues her mission to help young people avoid the struggles she faced. Up next is One Kiss, Two Gunshots, and a 15-year-old girl facing life in prison. Jackie Montanez, grew up in a very difficult environment in Chicago. She was born on May 29, 1976. From a young age, she says she was surrounded by substance use, fights inside the home, and physical mistreatment. She also says she went through inappropriate experiences no child should face. By her own account, she started drinking and using other substances around the age of 9. She ran away from home many times. By her early teenage years, she had joined a street group. Her childhood was unstable. She was sometimes placed in social services and often admitted to hospitals after harming herself or overdosing. These details were later used in court, as her lawyers argued that her background and trauma should have been considered during sentencing. On the night of May 12, 1992, two young men, Hector Reyes, who was about 22, and Jimmy Cruz, who was about 21 or 22, were brought to Humboldt Park in Chicago. Prosecutors said this meeting was set up by members of a rival group as payback for the recent passing of a friend known as Mudo. Court records show that 3 young women traveled together that night. Witness accounts said that Montanez went into a public bathroom where Hector Reyes was. She kissed him as a distraction, then used a firearm against him. She then handed the weapon to one of the other young women, who went outside and used it against Jimmy Cruz. Both men lost their lives that night. Montanez was taken into custody the following day. At the time, she was only 15 years old. But Illinois state law automatically required certain serious cases to be tried in adult court. Investigators treated the situation as group-related retaliation. The case presented in trial relied on statements given to police, eyewitness accounts, and the claim that the 3 young women had gone out that night looking for rivals. The state argued that what happened was not random but instead carefully planned. Montanez was found guilty in adult court on 2 counts of first-degree homicide. Illinois law at that time required a mandatory sentence. She was given life in prison with no chance of parole. When she turned 17, she was transferred to adult custody. She spent many years there, including time in a mental health unit, while appeals and retrials were taking place. Her case drew attention because she was among a very small number of people in the United States who were sentenced to life without parole for something done as a child. Advocacy groups, including Amnesty International, raised her case as an example of whether such punishments should be given to minors. Why would a 15-year-old bring a firearm into a public park and take 2 lives? Court records point to retaliation within a group feud. But the deeper answer is more complicated. Her past was filled with mistreatment, neglect, substance use, and pressure from street groups. The environment she grew up in normalized aggressive responses and survival through intimidation. This does not excuse what happened, but it explains how someone so young could end up involved in such a tragic event. Years later, the legal system in the United States changed. In the 2000s and 2010s, the Supreme Court ruled that mandatory life without parole for those under 18 was unconstitutional. The most important decision was Miller v. Alabama in 2012. Illinois courts later applied this ruling to past cases, which meant many juveniles who had been sentenced to life automatically could now receive new hearings. Montanez's case was one of them. Advocacy groups argued for her resentencing, pointing to her young age at the time, her history of trauma, her mental health issues, and the decades she had already served. In October 2016, a Cook County judge resentenced Jacqueline Montanez to a fixed term of 63 years. The judge applied the Supreme Court rulings to her case. Because of time already served and credits under the old rules, this meant she could become eligible for release in about 7 to 8 years from that hearing. This decision led to strong reactions. Some family members of the men wanted her to stay behind bars forever. Others acknowledged her childhood and saw the possibility of change. In court, she addressed the judge and said, "I am not the monster I used to be." That line was repeated often in local coverage. There was also controversy about detectives involved in her case. Detective Reynaldo Guevara and another officer faced many accusations in other cases, including pressuring witnesses and giving false testimony. Lawyers later said Guevara's methods led to unreliable statements and wrongful convictions. This history was also connected to another woman, Marilyn Mulero, whose legal team argued her confession had been forced. Because of these issues, Montanez's case has been discussed not just as a group-related incident, but also as part of a wider pattern of questionable police practices in Chicago. Over the years, Montanez has given many statements in interviews and court documents. She has expressed both responsibility and regret. One line often repeated by her supporters is, "I did what they say I did, I'm not who they say I am." During her resentencing, she told the court she had changed and was no longer the same person she was at 15. In 2017, she admitted she was the one who fired in both instances that night. That admission complicated other cases, but also raised new questions about how interrogations and prosecutions were handled in the past. The next 18-year-old, she dug 2 graves before choosing her victim. Then, a 9-year-old girl went out to play and never came home. If you find stories like this important, consider subscribing. Alyssa Bustamante grew up around Jefferson City, Missouri. Court records list her date of birth as January 28, 1994. That means she was 15 years old in October 2009 when the case happened, and she is 31 now. At that time, she was a high school sophomore. Her background was difficult. Friends and relatives said she often had mood swings. She engaged in self-harm, and her social media posts showed fascination with dark themes. Reports also mentioned at least one attempt to take her own life during her teenage years. Later, mental health evaluations shared with the court said she had major depressive disorder. They also noted signs linked to borderline personality issues. Her surroundings added pressure. She faced school struggles, family stress, and exposure to troubling material online. These factors showed that she was dealing with serious problems. Yet, she was also capable of planning and acting in ways that many people found hard to predict. On the evening of October 21, 2009, 9-year-old Elizabeth K. Olton went outside to play. She never returned home. The small community of St. W.W.W. Martins, Missouri, quickly grew worried. By the next day, search teams began looking in nearby areas. Investigators found Elizabeth in a wooded spot close to her home. Evidence showed she had lost her life after being restrained and harmed in several ways. Her body had been placed in a shallow grave and covered with leaves. Soon after, investigators focused on Alyssa Bustamante. She lived nearby. They later discovered that she had dug 2 shallow graves a few days earlier. They also said she used her younger sister to lure Elizabeth outside. Eventually, Alyssa herself led officers to the location where she had hidden Elizabeth. Her journal entry, written the very night of the incident, described what she had done and how she felt. Those words were presented in court as key evidence. Many people who read the journal entries ask the same question: why would a 15-year-old plan and carry out such an act? The answer came from Alyssa herself. In her writings and interviews, she said she wanted to know what it felt like to end someone's life. She wrote that the experience was pretty enjoyable. That statement, reported widely in the news, shocked the public and became a central part of how the case was understood. A grand jury later charged her with first-degree homicide and armed criminal action. Because of the seriousness of the case and the planning involved, the judge ordered that she be tried as an adult. Alyssa first appeared in court in November 2009. She pleaded not guilty at first. Over the next 2 years, both sides discussed possible outcomes. In January 2012, Alyssa accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to second-degree homicide and armed criminal action. This reduced the charges from a penalty of life without parole, but it still carried long prison terms. A few weeks later, the judge gave her the maximum sentence for second-degree homicide, which was life in prison. On top of that, she received an additional 30 years for armed criminal action. At sentencing, Alyssa addressed Elizabeth's family. She said, "If I could give my life to get her back, I would. I'm sorry." Those words were reported widely. Both sides presented their arguments. Prosecutors said Alyssa's actions showed planning. They pointed to the graves dug beforehand, the journal entries, and the way she involved her sister. The defense called mental health experts. They said Alyssa's young age, severe depression, and the effect of medication could have influenced her behavior. One psychiatrist said Prozac, a medication Alyssa had been prescribed, can sometimes cause unusual or aggressive behavior in teens. The court heard those arguments but still accepted the plea and sentencing. Later, appeals and requests for a new trial were denied. Investigators concluded that the act was planned. Testimony showed that Alyssa had prepared 2 graves in advance. She used her sister to bring Elizabeth outside. She also admitted this in her journal the night it happened. These facts led prosecutors to push for the most serious charges. It also influenced the judge's choice to treat her as an adult. Although the plea lowered the charge, the sentence was still long. Alyssa's life sentence, along with the 30 years for armed criminal action, means she will remain in prison for decades unless parole is granted. During sentencing, she said again that she was extremely, very sorry. Elizabeth's family reacted with visible grief. Her mother called Alyssa an evil monster during the proceedings. The judge gave the harshest possible sentence under the law. The defense also tried to argue that medication could have influenced her behavior. Prosecutors repeated that the planning and the journal entries proved her intent. The court rejected medication as a reason to reduce guilt or punishment. Elizabeth's family pursued justice in more than one way. They also filed a civil case and reached a financial settlement. Alyssa appealed some parts of the case, but her efforts to change the outcome did not succeed. Over time, Missouri laws about parole for juveniles changed. In 2024, the state removed early parole for people convicted of first and second-degree homicide as juveniles. But Alyssa was still granted a parole hearing in mid-2024 because of timing. The parole board denied her release. Another hearing will be scheduled under current law. She is currently held in a women's correctional facility in Missouri. Public records confirm she has been there since 2012. Reports show only limited disciplinary issues, and she remains in custody. Sarah Marie Johnson was 16 years old and living in Bellevue, Idaho. On the morning of September 2nd, 2003, her life and her family's life completely changed. Her parents, Diane and Alan Scott Johnson, were found after being shot inside their home. From that day, everyone in the community and the justice system wanted to understand why this happened. Sarah had been in a relationship with a 19-year-old named Bruno Santos. He had left school early and was living in the U.S. without proper documents. People in town also said he was involved with illegal substances. Her parents were very unhappy about the relationship. They warned him and even considered taking legal steps that could have forced him to leave the country. They wanted to protect their daughter, but Sarah saw this as them standing in the way of her freedom and happiness. Investigators later said this conflict became her biggest motive. In the early hours of that morning, Sarah walked to the guest house on their property. It was easy for her to get inside. She picked up a .264 caliber Winchester Model 70 rifle that belonged to a tenant who was away at the time. At around 6:20 a.m., she went into her parents' bedroom. Her mother was still sleeping when Sarah fired one shot to her head. She then moved through the house. Her father had just stepped out of the shower when she pointed the same rifle at him and fired into his chest. He collapsed and passed away soon after. The question remained, did she act out of desperation to keep her relationship, or did she knowingly cross a moral line she could never return from? In court, prosecutors said the answer was clear. They explained that her parents' effort to break her away from Bruno was what drove her actions. Her defense team argued differently. They said Sarah had been suffering from depression and had even attempted to take her own life before. These struggles, they claimed, may have clouded her judgment and her emotions. In the days after the incident, investigators uncovered evidence. They found a pink bathrobe worn backwards. They also found a shower cap that had been flushed, along with latex gloves and leather gloves in the trash. The leather gloves showed gun residue. DNA from both parents and from Sarah was discovered on these items. Inside Sarah's own bedroom, they also found one of the matching leather gloves. 2 years later, in 2005, her case went to trial in Ada County. Sarah was charged with 2 counts of first-degree unlawful action leading to loss of life. The jury found her guilty. She received 2 life sentences without parole, plus 15 extra years for using a firearm. Her defense tried to argue that she may not have acted alone. They also said her mental health struggles could mean she deserved a chance at rehabilitation. A psychiatrist testified that Sarah could one day be a productive member of society, but the judge said the seriousness of what she had done required a fixed life term. Sarah appealed the decision. In 2008, the Idaho Supreme Court upheld her conviction. They rejected the claims about jury instructions and procedural mistakes. Years later, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2 major cases, Miller v. Alabama in 2012 and Montgomery v. Louisiana in 2016. These decisions said that automatic life sentences without parole for young people were unconstitutional unless in very rare cases. Because of these rulings, Sarah requested a new sentencing. She argued that her punishment violated her rights under the 8th Amendment. However, both state and federal courts denied her request. They confirmed that her life sentences would stay in place. Up next is a promise ring, a forbidden romance, and a teenager ready to sacrifice everything to keep it. Aaron Caffey grew up in Alba, Texas. She was raised in a religious household. Her family were devoted members of the Miracle Faith Baptist Church. Her father, Terry, worked as a youth pastor, and her mother, Penny, played piano during services. Aaron sang in the church choir. Her younger brothers, Matthew, who was 13 at the time, and Tyler, who was 8, were also involved in church music. The children had been homeschooled with a Bible-based curriculum for 3 years. Aaron returned to public school just 6 weeks before the incident. When Aaron was 16, she started working at a Sonic restaurant. That was where she met 18-year-old Charlie Wilkinson. Their relationship grew quickly. Wilkinson gave her a promise ring that had belonged to his grandmother, and they often talked about getting married. Aaron's parents became worried. They saw Wilkinson's MySpace page, which had a lot of profanity and suggestive content. They also noticed Aaron's grades dropping. Because of this, they told her to end the relationship and return to homeschooling. Aaron was upset. She began discussing a plan with Wilkinson and later his friend Charles Wade, with the goal of removing her parents from the picture. In February of 2008, Aaron told friends about dark ideas. She felt this was the only way to stay with Wilkinson. Her ex-boyfriend later revealed that she had even asked him to harm her family before. He refused and ended the relationship. On the night of February 28th, going into March 1st, Wilkinson and Wade went into the Caffey home. Aaron and Wade's girlfriend, Bobby Johnson, stayed in a car outside. Wilkinson carried a small pistol. He fired at Terry and Penny. When the gun jammed, Wade used a sword-like weapon on Penny. Upstairs, the brothers were also harmed. One was shot, and the other sustained injuries from the sword. Wilkinson then gathered valuables. Reports say he owed Wade $2,000. They set the house on fire before leaving. Terry, though shot multiple times, managed to escape. He climbed out through a window and crawled for more than an hour until he reached a neighbor's house for help. Before the plan was carried out, Wilkinson told Aaron they would have to silence her brothers so there would be no witnesses. Aaron's alleged response was, "I don't care, just do what you gotta do." The reason behind the act was anger and desperation. Aaron thought if her parents were gone, she could continue her relationship with Wilkinson. She may have believed it was the only way out. It raises a troubling question. How did her strong religious upbringing fit with her actions, or did her emotions outweigh everything else? The case was solved very quickly. Within 1 day, all 4 people involved were arrested. Aaron first claimed she had been taken against her will, but her story fell apart under questioning. Wilkinson and Wade both said the idea had come from Aaron. Aaron eventually pleaded guilty. Although she was only 16, she was tried as an adult. In early 2009, she accepted a plea deal. She was given 2 life sentences, with the possibility of parole at age 59, after serving 43 years. Wilkinson and Wade also took plea deals. They were sentenced to life without parole. Johnson, who had acted as lookout but did not take part in the act inside, received 40 years, with parole eligibility after 20. Aaron's punishment was very serious. She is now serving her sentence in Texas. She will not have the chance for parole until she turns 59. Today, Aaron is 33 years old. She remains incarcerated in Texas, serving 2 life sentences.